Okay.
Good morning, everyone. We're really thrilled that you're with us today. And this is the Executive Forum, Executive Leadership Forum that Phil Walker. Hi, Phil. How you doing over there in Austin?
Good morning. Good morning.
Phil and I launched the Executive Forum probably back in March of 2020, and you're going to get to hear more about the purpose of the Executive Leadership Forum. Today, we're very excited to be coming together. Phil and I are CPI partners, and fortunately, we're just right up the street from each other with Austin and San Antonio as our quarter. Today, we are going to have this recorded, so you will receive a recording. And we want you to know that Phil and I, along with all of our CPI partners internationally, this is where everyone is at, and together we get to work to serve our clients in many different ways. One of which is being able to provide learning initiatives like we've been doing since March of 2020. So we keep growing together and collaborating together as CPI partners to serve the world. Phil, you want to go ahead and share more about what this Executive Leadership Forum is all about?
Absolutely. Again, good morning, Barbara. Good morning to our listening audience, and welcome back to the Executive Leadership Forum. You know, Barbara, I don't know about you, but I absolutely can't believe that we're already at the end of summer, and this might be a good time for us to pause and kind of reflect and consider all the challenges that we faced this year, and the fact that, you know what, we got a lot to be thankful for. And it's also a good time for us to take a step back and make sure that we extend our best wishes and thoughts and prayers to our friends in Louisiana who are struggling through the aftermath of Ida. You know, there's a lot of devastation there, so our thoughts and prayers are with them. But like many of you today, I am looking forward to this, what I'll call a very relevant conversation with two dynamic speakers, John Rogers and May Snowden. For those of you who have not attended our quarterly sessions in the past, as Barbara mentioned earlier, we created the Executive Leadership Forum, I think that was about April of May or May of last year, with the goal of really offering a platform for organization leaders to connect and share insights about current and pressing subject topics while also learning from each other, right? So I think we all recognize over the last 18 months, businesses have experienced really unprecedented challenges. Our goal through the forum is to provide valuable information that would help address many of these challenges and identify ways to empower company leadership with the tools and resources required to build an agile and resilient organization. Hence, our relevant topic today, board diversification, moving from interest to action. And Barbara and I personally are committed to helping organizations and businesses and the community at large really understand the critical importance of having a diverse and inclusive environment. Also, part of our tradition and mission for the forum is to recognize quarterly a nonprofit in both the Austin and the San Antonio markets that's really making a difference in the communities that they serve. This quarter, I'm proud to recognize a nonprofit from Austin, Texas, called Measure. And Measure's mission is really to ensure that what they call the lived experience data of traditionally marginalized populations is used by communities and institutions to design and implement equitable solutions to address social disparities. You know, unfortunately, in the social justice ecosystem, the reality is that data is not used effectively or, in many instances, collaboratively. And so Measure works to empower people impacted by data disparities and the accompanying narrative. You know, the organization was founded by Mimi Stiles back in 2015. And she founded and really created this organization because she was looking at the numbers that were being shown, the data that was being shown and reported by the Austin Police Department, and the results of that as it relates to their performance. And she realized that there was a disconnect between the data that was being reported by the police department and the community. And so she was prompted to kind of create this methodology to measure community policing. Now, today, the organization has grown from just doing community policing to health and education and economic disparities across the region. So I'd like to take a second and just invite you to visit their website and kind of view some of the projects and initiatives that they're engaged in, such as the Innocence Initiative, where they measure taps into the power of the community to holistically advocate against adultification bias. I'd also like you to encourage you to support Measure and their mission by donating to the organization and/or maybe even volunteering. So again, with all that said, we'd like to just offer kudos to Measure for making a big difference in the Austin area. You know, I mentioned our title earlier, Board Diversification, moving from interest to action. The role of a board member, and whether that's a corporate or nonprofit board member, involves various responsibilities, including, you know, corporate governance and strategic planning and helping to shape the organization. So we'd like just to take a minute and really gauge, if you will, our listening audience on where you believe your organization ranks in this next area. On a scale of 1 to 5, how involved is your board, whether you work for a corporation or a nonprofit? How involved is your board with helping to drive a diversity and inclusion business strategy? Again, on a scale of 1 to 5, just take a second. How involved is your board with helping to drive a diversity and inclusion business strategy?
They're coming in.
Yes, they are. Mm-hmm.
So it looks
Interesting.
like that many people are wanting to elevate their involvement by
Yep.
being here today, Phil.
That's a good thing.
And then also it sounds like that we've got 14% of them that says very involved. And I suspect they're affirming how they're involved and benchmarking that against what our wonderful experts are talking about today, May and John.
Absolutely. Good stuff. Good stuff. Thank you, audience, for participating in that quick survey for us. It really kind of gives us the temperature of what's on your minds today, and where you and your organizations are as it relates to diversity and inclusion business strategy. I'd like to also just to take a second, you know, we changed our, we slightly modified our format today. We're going to be more in a one-on-one conversational format, which I will tell you, we're really excited about. So I'd like to conduct a quick housekeeping assignment for you. I'd like for each of you just to go to the top right-hand part of your screen and click on the little box with the 9 dots, and then select Speaker View. Again, top right-hand part of your screen, click on the click on the little box with the 9 dots, and then select Speaker View. Great. Thank you so much, and we really appreciate it. Again, I mentioned earlier that I am absolutely excited and ecstatic about not just our subject topic today, board diversification and moving from interest to action, but doubly excited about our 2 panelists who will participate in this conversation. And I'd like to just introduce our first panelist, who has the role of interviewer. May Snowden. May is certainly not a stranger to the Executive Leadership Forum and has been a speaker in one of our previous sessions. May and her background and experience is probably a little bit too long for our and extensive for our program today. So I'll just highlight some of the many benefits and some of the many levels of expertise that she has in her background. But May is a senior fellow in human capital and program director for 2 councils of the Conference Board, the Global Diversity and Inclusion Executives Council and the Diversity and Inclusion Leaders Council. May is a nationally recognized diversity and inclusion voice with significant experience as a C-level human resources and diversity leader with such companies as Starbucks, Eastman Kodak, and US West. May also serves as a senior consultant for diversity, equity, and inclusion with Career Partners International. So May, welcome back to the forum. It's good to see you as always.
Thank you. Great to be here.
May, it's great to have you again. And, you know, since we have been working together with May, we have been fortunate to have organizations see the gifts that May has to bring her into companies to continue the conversation of DE&I. So we're really lucky. And May also knows John, who she's going to introduce here in a few moments as our speaker. They know each other very well. And May, I know you're going to talk more about that collaboration as well.
Hey May, if you would do this, just before you introduce John, we just got a couple of minutes here. Just before you introduce John, just talk a little bit more about your background and history and engagement around not just diversity and inclusion with corporations, but also with boards.
Thank you, Phil. Well, I started my own business in 2007. And as I branched out on my own, I did a whole lot of work with mostly CDOs and helping them build their strategies. But then I noticed that there seemed to be kind of there wasn't a connection with the most senior leaders, and there was no connection with the board of directors. And with the board's responsibility of governance and their responsibility for selecting CEOs, and they have such power in the way they ask questions of the senior leaders and how the senior leaders take those questions and they get things done. They want to answer the questions. Everybody wants to do their very, very best. I believe in people. And so I thought that, you know, there is a disconnect that perhaps is causing companies to not be able to advance as fast as they would like to advance in the whole area of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Because see, I'm working with the chief diversity officers or whoever, the chief HRO officer, whoever is responsible for that strategy in their organization. So I started doing just doing my own research and getting involved with the NACD and other groups. The Conference Board has a lot of information on governance and boards. And so I started looking into that and seeing where the connections are and the disconnects. And basically, I learned that you know, based on the governance role of the boards and their focus on revenues and their focus on profitability and growth, that they had not got the message about DE&I. You know, they don't have the message about the benefits of having a culture in your organization that helps people to be better at them, whatever they do. They didn't have the information about how collaboration and the dialogue amongst different units in the organization can help you be a whole lot more effective. They didn't have the information about how inequity is built in our systems and our processes that cause the outcomes that we are generating today. So I started thinking that, perhaps that is the place that we need to begin our whole awareness and education is at the board level throughout the organization, because everybody is connected. Everybody has a part to play in delivering the bottom line outcome of any organization's success. So, I just started by myself doing my research, engaging with people, and now I have lots of great opportunities to meet with boards, to give them information, to provide awareness, learning for them, to help them understand what kinds of questions they should be asking their CEO and leadership team, how they can close the gap, through their questions and holding leaders accountable. So thank you so much, Phil, for that question. Hopefully I answered it for you.
Absolutely. Has John joined us yet? Is John popped
I'm
up?
John.
Great.
Hi, John.
Hi, it says that the video wasn't working. Now it's working. Okay, good.
All right. Okay. Good to see you.
It's good to see you. Good to be here.
John, welcome. John, welcome to the Executive Leadership Forum.
Glad. This is an exciting morning. I've been listening the last 15 minutes, and it sounds like you guys have a great history.
Yeah.
Thank you, John. I'm Barbara Green, and I'm Phil's partner in Career Partners International. We're located in San Antonio, and so it has been a lot of fun, and we've had numerous guests following us for some time and being on this. So we're glad to hear from you.
Great.
So thank you, Phil and Barbara. It's always a pleasure, just a pleasure to participate with you, and especially on your executive leadership forums. So today I have the honor to introduce all of you to John Rogers Jr. He is the chairman and co-CEO and chief investment officer for Ariel Investments. And Ariel Investments is a global value-based asset management firm founded by John in 1983. You want to know about Ariel Investments. Everybody here, you want to know that. Please go online and check them out. If your organization is not utilizing them for investments, you're missing out. So John founded Ariel in 1983, as I mentioned. His professional accomplishments extend to the boardroom, where he's a member of the board of directors for McDonald's, for Nike, and the New York Times Company. These are current board assignments for him. Mr. Rogers has one of the longest track records in the business. His flagship fund, Ariel Fund, is the only mid-cap value fund in the US that dates back to 1986. I learned about Ariel when I was working at Starbucks because they were one of our investors. He has been highlighted along legendary investors like Warren Buffett, Sir John Templeton, and Ben Graham as one of the world's largest investors. So we are really, really grateful to have him here. Mr. Rogers is known for his patient and contrarian investing philosophy, which uses the market's short-term focus to uncover mispriced companies whose true value will be realized over time. Ariel Investments is the first African-American owned asset management firm in American history and the largest minority-owned investment firm. So John was featured also on the cover of Kiplinger's, I hope you can see this, Kiplinger's Personal Finance magazine in July. So please see John's bio in the follow-up material when you receive it, because I just highlighted his experience and highlighted his background. So John, we're so pleased to have you. Thank you so much for joining us today. So this is going to be a conversation, but I want to just start out by saying that there is tremendous increase on the focus of diversity stemming from the investors, stakeholders, and regulators alike. So on August 6th, we learned from NASDAQ that push for greater diversity on corporate boards cleared a key hurdle with SEC regulators. And they approved the exchange operators proposal to include gender and race in its listing rules. That's phenomenal. Under the proposal, NASDAQ listed companies would need to meet certain minimum targets for the gender and ethnic diversity of their boards, or explain in writing why they aren't doing so. So for most US companies, the target would be to have at least one woman director, at least one, as well as a director who identifies as a racial minority or as a lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, or queer. So companies would also be required to disclose their diversity statistics about their boards. So we're really looking at transparency. Companies are asked to be transparent about their information in their company as well. Employees are wanting transparency. So companies now are really dealing with the fact that they have to actually take action rather than just talk about their commitment to DE&I. Now, the most recent missing pieces report that you'll get a copy of with the materials that you're going to receive indicated that we have 6 Fortune 500 companies remaining composed entirely of white male board members. And 5 of these 6 boards have been comprised entirely of white males since 2016, when Deloitte began collaborating with Alliance of Board Diversity on the Missing Pieces report. So we still have some work to do. In 2016, there were 15 boards with 0 gender, racial, and ethnicity diversity, but now it's down to 6. So see, we're making progress. So the ABD and Deloitte acknowledge that the progress made on overall diversity has largely been due to the increase of white women on boards. But having white women on boards sometimes causes the boards now, because women are saying, you know, we want more diversity. We want more diversity. And so we need those voices. So overall, the report indicates a very gradual progress in diversity of America's boardrooms. But you're going to get a copy, and you're going to also help us to improve the results that we have right now to even get better results. So that's basically where we stand, and we're going to have a conversation that hopefully will help to enlighten you some more. And we encourage your questions. We encourage you to raise your hand if you have a question. We also encourage you to put questions in the chat box, and I will have some help in looking at questions that are coming up. So thank you very much. And John, I am delighted to have you. And my first question for you is this whole big question that I think these 6 boards that don't have any women or people of color or other diverse individuals on there, maybe this would be helpful. So how important is it to have diverse perspectives on the board? Is it important?
It's very, very important. And as a professional investor, when we're making investment choices for our mutual funds, we often sit and talk with management teams. And because we focus on small and mid-cap stocks in our Chicago office, that, you know, and what I've been doing for 38 years, we often tell the companies we invest in that if you don't have a diverse board, it's going to be very difficult for us to invest in you. We want to invest in 21st century companies, not companies that look like 1940s companies. And we tell people that all the time. And what we remind them of, which everyone knows, that when you bring together diverse perspectives and diverse points of view, you're going to get better decision making. You're going to have more creative decision making. You're going to have more thoughtful ideas being brought from people who bring different experiences to the boardroom. So you're going to be better. You know, as Reverend Jackson always says, baseball became a better sport once Jackie Robinson started to play, and Hank Aaron started to play, and Ernie Banks started to play, Willie Mays. It became better. So your company will be stronger, it will be better when you're searching everywhere for talent. The second point I always make is your customers care. You know, when customers want to see that you've got diverse boards and diverse management teams. And at the same time, when you have diverse board members, you're going to be able to be more creative and thoughtful in being able to reach diverse communities. You're going to be able to have that perspective that will help you as you market and engage with your consumers. And of course, as you're going out and attracting talent, young people these days want to be involved with companies that have a purpose. They want to be involved in companies that believe in ESG. They want to be involved with companies that look like America. And so if you look like in this old-fashioned 1940s company, you're not going to be able to attract the best and brightest talent to your organization. So those are all things that I think make a tremendous difference. And I also, as I've touched on, not only are we shareholders who care about these things, but more and more in this modern day, the major shareholders throughout the nation are asking those questions of corporations they're investing in. So the bottom line, you're going to have better relationship with your customers, you can have better relationship with your employees, you can have better relationship with your shareholders, and you're ultimately going to be able to make better decisions for your company when you have a diverse board.
Yeah, with that, I don't see why we don't have all companies with a diverse board, because the language in the business case is just so prevalent. It's so true. And by 2040, I believe I read lately, the minority is going to be the majority. And this is a global thing. Minorities are going to be the majority. So that's your customers. That's your community. That's going to be the folks that will be either providing the success of your organization or not. So this is a very important topic for corporate boards and organizations. So John, then if it's so important, then what's the role of corporate board directors in advancing DE&I strategies?
Well, I think it's a really important role that directors have to make sure that companies are living up to the values that they say they believe in. My father was a Tuskegee Airman, the original Tuskegee Airman, and flew over 100 missions in World War II. And he constantly reminded me the most important thing was to always live up to the commitments that you make to others. And so many of these publicly traded companies have well-defined commitments to diversity and inclusion. You see on their websites, you see it in their annual reports. They all have diversity and inclusion reports. The CEO is often talking about the importance publicly. So one of the things I do as a director is I try to make sure that I'm reminding companies that they have a responsibility to live up to what they've promised. If they have these false promises out there, it's not only morally wrong, but there's starting to actually be litigation from people, a plaintiff's bar saying this is a real problem. If you made these public statements, you're not living up to them. It's a real problem. So as a director, I'm there to help them do that, help them live up to the values they say the company believes in. The second thing I tell people all the time is that we want to get to Black and brown and women and directors from all the different diverse communities on boards willing to speak up and fight for economic justice and fairness in the boardroom. Because too often, you're the first person of color, or maybe you're the first gay director, you're the first woman director, and you might get somewhat shy about challenging, the white male leadership. But as we all know, if we don't follow in John Lewis's footsteps and point out things that are not right when we're in these leadership roles and don't make good trouble, nothing will ever change for us. And we'll continue to not fully participate in our capitalist democracy if we don't hold the majority community accountable for what they say they believe in.
That's powerful. So really, you cannot have growth without accountability. It appears to me that that really does drive the growth in anything, is that people are committed to what they say, committed to their values, committed to integrity around their values.
This is Linda. We have a question I think works well for this. What is the impact to funding for nonprofit organizations when they don't have a diverse board?
Great question.
Well, more and more, I know that the progressive foundational leadership, folks at the Chicago Community Trust here in Chicago, I know the Knight Foundation run by Alberto Ibargüen, in Miami, and many, many other progressive foundations are holding they're really holding accountable the nonprofits that they give to. They tell people all the time they've got to now fill out surveys and show the diversity of their boards, the diversity of their leadership teams, if they want to get grants from major foundations throughout the United States. So I think that is a real important change that's occurring. And it really is pushing these nonprofits to have diverse boards because they know that their funders care deeply about it. At the same time, I do think, and maybe we'll get to this more, often these nonprofits are not, once they have diverse boards and have a couple of diverse leaders, they're still spending money only with white male organizations. And there's a disconnect there. Because if you really want to create wealth and economic opportunity, how you spend your money has enormous impact also. And it's sometimes, I think, kind of a little bit morally wrong that people are desperate to get African Americans or women or diverse communities on boards where you're serving a nonprofit for free, you're writing checks, you're giving your all to the community. But then when they go out and spend money, all of the folks that are receiving that money are often white male lawyers, accountants, money managers, public relations firms, government affairs firms, whatever it is. And so it's just, it's not an equal equation. It's not a fair equation if we don't do both.
Mm. That just really does lead into my next question too, John, and that is about the role of the CEO in successfully implementing DE&I initiatives in these 4 basic areas that I truly focus in on with organizations in helping them build their strategy. And the 4 areas are human capital management practices. And oftentimes we just focus in on human capital. But I would like for you to also speak to our advertising, our marketing, and our sales practices that get to our consumers, our suppliers, contractors, or third-party contractors that really do help to build wealth in different organizations, different groups. And then finally, the political and charitable contributions that you were just touching on, the charitable ones, but also we contribute to in the political arena as well. And oftentimes it appears that maybe that contribution is not quite aligned with our values and how we are directing our organization within. So could you touch on some of those things there, John?
Yeah, well, there's a lot there, so it's hard to.
Anyone you want to pick?
Yeah, it's a lot, but I guess I would start with a couple of things. You mentioned, the wealth building opportunities that can be created through board service. And so one of the examples I give, maybe just to start with, is that I've been fortunate to be on the University of Chicago board for about 20 years now. And maybe it was 13 years ago or so, a dozen years ago, I was having lunch with the president, Bob Zimmer, and we were lamenting the fact that at the time I was the only African-American trustee out of 60 trustees, and how that just didn't make sense in Chicago, Hyde Park, a progressive institution like the University of Chicago. And President Zimmer is a very thoughtful, progressive, extraordinary leader. And what we talked about, I said, Bob, if you, as a progressive leader at a progressive institution like the University of Chicago, never spend money with minority-owned companies, how do you expect any of us to create the wealth and stature to qualify to be on your board? And if you're not doing it at the University of Chicago, you can bet the other nonprofits throughout the country are not doing that either. And Bob is a mathematician. He said every once in a while, someone gives you an idea in mathematics about a different way to solve a complex problem. And Bob has said publicly, I kind of helped him think about this problem in an entirely different way. And now, 12 years later, the University of Chicago, through its yearly symposium, has now created economic opportunities for over 95 minority-owned professional services firms. The University of Chicago hires, again, minority law firms, accounting firms, consulting firms, advertising agencies. They've advertised in Ebony Magazine and Black Enterprise Magazine. They've got minority public relations firms and government affairs firms, 15 minority money managers for their endowment. They're doing all these wonderful things. Now there's 95 entrepreneurs that can say, The University of Chicago is one of their anchor customers. And the impact that has on them being able to grow their businesses and be successful into the future is immeasurable. And so if you think about it, if there's a virtuous circle of all the nonprofits and major anchor institutions in our local community committed to doing that, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, you would have a whole generation of large minority-owned law firms, large minority-owned consulting firms, ad agencies, whatever you want to point to, technology firms, which of course are really important, healthcare firms that are important. And those would be the folks who would then be on all the major boards, both corporate and nonprofits, because they've been so successful. They had the kind of wealth that could be generational wealth that could be utilized to, support their families and their grandkids. And to your other part of your point, once you create that kind of wealth in minority communities, it creates political empowerment. These minority-owned companies will be out there supporting progressive candidates in their local communities. They'll be out there giving to their local churches and their local philanthropies, working with other minority businesses and helping them succeed. And at the same time, of course, employing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people as their businesses grow. When they have an anchor institution working with them, they'll go out and employ people. So that's a great thing that if you can do this the right way and have the kind of leadership that Bob Zimmer's created, the impact can be just dramatic to this point of getting more women and people of color and people from diverse communities onto boards because they've built successful business careers.
Well, I love that. It just gets me back to, nature. When you just think about nature and how things grow, you got to have really good soil. When you have good soil that's been nourished, it's been, fertilized, taken care of, watered, you put that seed in there, that seed's going to grow. That seed is going to grow, it's going to thrive. All you have to do is just do your work around keeping that soil and those things around it clean. So that's basically what we're talking about here as we're looking at how do we help people develop, how do we help people grow. So that was terrific. I see a little note says, what was that note? It went off. It was just really kind of caught me. Let me put it back up because I just thought it was just so good. Next time I feel discouraged by how much racism and other isms I observe in our world, I will remember this conversation and take hope from the idea that if diversity becomes the way business is done, and if DE&I is embedded in the business world, it will invade the culture in such a positive way. Thank you so much for that note. Oh, that is so positive and so true.
I love that.
Yeah.
And it reminds me, University of Chicago coined the term business diversity to replace the old-fashioned terminology of supplier diversity. Everyone on this Zoom knows our economy has become a professional services, financial services, technology economy. And most universities, for example, most hospitals, most anchor institutions know that if they build a new building, they should use a minority contractor and to construct it. And maybe they'll use a janitorial services firm or a caterer. Those are important businesses. Those provide jobs. That's great. But we all know the wealth is really coming from those sectors that I talked about earlier, the private equity guys, the venture capital folks, the technology people, the heads of the law firms, et cetera. And I've said it's a modern day Jim Crow if you only do business with Black and brown people in catering and construction and give the professional services to the white men. That's just morally wrong.
Very good, very good. I also know that because things are so public related to the issues of today, and politics are so much part of it, that our employees and organizations are very much focused in on where are our contributions going to. So as you think about your charitable contributions, as you think about your PAC donations and working with government relations, make sure that you are aligned, your values are completely aligned throughout your organization. And your board can help you do that just by asking the appropriate questions to help you think through it. to make sure that you're doing the right things for the business, as well as doing the right things for your employees and our society. John, what can boards encourage their management teams to do to increase diversity internally and in their external relationships? And you've spoke a little bit about it, but if you have something that you could go into a little bit, maybe take us a case or something that you can use to answer this question.
Well, I guess if you wanted to use a case, to your point, Exelon Corporation, where I was forced to serve on the board for 18 years, had the best programs around this really important issue. And it was led by a man named Bill Von Haney, who had been a longtime partner at Jenner & Block, the law firm, then came to Exelon and ultimately became the #2 person after serving as general counsel. And he helped create 2 programs along with a great team there. One was to be transparent with how the money was being spent with minority companies. And I would get a big book every year that was this thick, where I could see all the contracts and be able to see how much was going to every single category by race, by sex. And it was just really extraordinarily well done. And to me, as a director, I could sort of say, hey, Exelon, we own utilities in Baltimore and Philadelphia and Washington, D.C. and Chicago. And we're spending a minute amount of money with minority-owned advertising agencies. Why is that? Why can't we do better? We're trying to reach minority communities. We should be using minority ad agencies. I wouldn't have been able to see that if I didn't have full transparency of how they were spending their money. The second thing that Exelon does really well, and this is Bill's initiative completely, he holds all of the majority professional services companies accountable for the diversity of the teams on the relationship with Exelon. So if they hire Kirkland & Ellis to be a law firm, or JP Morgan Chase to be an investment banking firm, or Goldman Sachs, or Deloitte to be a consultant or an auditor, all those firms know they're going to be held accountable to the diversity of the teams that are on that Exelon relationship. And every year he would have a dinner at the R Institute where he celebrated these professional services organizations for their commitment to diversity and inclusion. And he honored those that had made the most progress of adding more diversity to the teams that were on the Exelon team, Exelon relationship. And then, of course, those that didn't make progress, that didn't take this responsibility seriously, Exelon would stop doing business with them. And again, so their audit firms, their law firms, their investment banking firms, their consultants all knew to show up with increasing diverse teams or lose that opportunity to work with Exelon. So I'd say they are the model, they are the case study, they are the best of the best in the United States when it comes to this kind of transparency. And I've ran into many people around the country who work with Exelon and said this has had a major impact on how they think about their hiring and who becomes a partner or a managing director within their organizations. So I think measuring that, I think as a director, getting every company to do the same thing, be transparent with how they spend their money, transparent with the professional services relationships they have and the diversity of those teams. It's something we can all ask of the companies that we're on the board of or the nonprofits that we're on the board of, because universities and hospitals and museums spend a fortune also in local communities, and sometimes are the largest employers and largest spenders. And then finally, of course, what Bill Von Haney also did at Exelon, not only did we measure the executive ranks and hold management teams accountable for having diverse teams at Exelon itself, he was always on the lookout for up and coming talent and helping move people to the right positions so that their career paths would be extraordinarily successful. And so it's like right now, there's an African-American, Calvin Butler, who runs all of Exelon utilities and #2 person now in the entire organization. It all started 10 years ago or more when Bill identified him as a talent and made sure his career path led to greatness.
Those are excellent examples, just excellent examples. One of the things I had an opportunity to experience working with one of the companies that I work with was we received a big job from an RFP that we had bid on. And the reason that we received it, according to the company, was because of our DE&I strategy and the results that we had accomplished in such a short time based on the strategy. And that was the biggest reason to receive it. That was publicized with the board, publicized throughout the organization. The senior leaders were really proud of themselves about that and wanted to do more. My phone was just ringing off the hook because of that. But I tell you, when those kind of B2B businesses, if you are a B2B business and you have RFPs out there, make sure that that is an area that you're looking for when you're wanting to get services from another organization, because that is something that really does inspire and drives and really will get you the best results too that you're looking for on your proposal.
May, we have another question from Gail Baker. How receptive are boards to the guidance and direction provided?
You know, it's every board is different. You know, it's interesting to say that I've been on boards where, as I mentioned, whether it's University of Chicago, Exelon, McDonald's, and I had a call around this issue with Nike just yesterday, day before. There are companies out there that are just really, once they hear how they can do more, they're eager to do more. It's in their culture, and all they need sometimes to have is a sort of a little bit of a playbook of how to get this done. And of course, there's more and more interest after the George Floyd murder and the tragedies of last year. Melody Hobson, my co-CEO, and I are getting calls all the time from corporations who are eager to change their sort of traditional way of looking at these things and to bring it out in a new way. You know, one of the things when I was talking to Nike the other day, which is great, is, you know, one of the things that makes Nike great is they've been so forward thinking over the last 50 years, always ahead of the curve with product, with ESG, and all the different things they do. Phil Knight was a genius at that. And you want to have that same kind of forward thinking genius when it comes to thinking about diversity and inclusion. Not doing things the way it was always done 40 years ago, but do it in a way that's going to be relevant to the 21st century. And I think sometimes it's just natural to go backwards and look at, well, how have we always done this? But to be successful, of course, you've got to be able to do things in a different, in a creative way. So again, there are a lot of companies, a lot of institutions that are willing to do that. But I would say here in Chicago, it's kind of interesting. As I mentioned, the University of Chicago is a model. You know, DePaul, Loyola, Roosevelt, Columbia, IIT have not followed in those. They basically continue to only work with white men outside of construction in a few areas. Same thing with the major museums in Chicago, the Art Institute, the Field Museum, the Aquarium, the Planetarium, science industry, have not been willing to follow the University of Chicago's model that went from 0 to 95 economic opportunities for minority-owned companies. So, and as I said earlier, why this is so relevant to this conversation, those successful minority entrepreneurs will be more than likely to be on corporate boards in the next 5 to 10 years because they are given these economic opportunities and opportunities to build their businesses into businesses of scale that will attract the attention of board recruiters. These things, it's all a virtuous circle here. So your question is just, there are a lot of progressive companies out there that do it really well, and just so many that just are really, really, really bad and just don't care. And their board members are sort of people who, frankly, have not lived in diverse communities and don't understand that economic opportunity is important. You know, and Dr. King often said that, you know, many progressive white Americans deplore prejudice, but accept or ignore economic injustice. And unfortunately, that's still the majority. And there's still this implicit unconscious bias out there that is still relevant. And so we got to celebrate the good guys and point out the ones that are not as progressive as they claim to be.
Yeah, that almost gets me into my next question there, John, which is kind of based on the current state of representation of women and people of color on board. So we're not where we want to be. So there is a gap. And so I'm wanting to discuss why we have this gap. So there are some reasons, and I think you kind of got into it about, you know, we live in neighborhoods, we live in where our environments where we don't basically see or think about diversity. And we know that we feel for ourselves that we're a very inclusive people. However, we have this gap. So what what's causing the gap and what can we do about it? What do we need? What's the strategies and actions that cause the gap? And what's the strategies and actions that can get us out of that? What needs to change?
Well, it's kind of, it fits in with what we've been talking about this morning. And, you know, wealth in our society is tied to so much. You know, the wealthiest people in America get the best educations, they live in the best communities, they get the best health care, and they get the best opportunities to serve on boards. The wealthier you are, the more likely you're going to serve on a corporate board. These things are all directly correlated. So the problem is, you guys know, our wealth gap in this country has gotten steadily worse over the last 40 years. The data is crystal clear. You know, the fantastic dean of Yale's business school, Kerwin Charles, has this all kinds of data, but my favorite highlight is, or low light, is relative to white Americans today. African Americans are worse off. We're worse off relative to white Americans today than we were versus our grandparents' generation. So this wealth gap is so much worse today than it was 40 years ago. The other data point that I use is Ray Bashara, who was at the St. Louis Fed. Between 1992 and 2016, roughly 25 years, college-educated Blacks saw their wealth decline 10%, while college-educated whites saw their wealth increase 96%. You know, that's a huge gap over a 25-year period. Again, down 10% for African Americans, college-educated, up 96 for white college-educated folks. And my final data point I use, here in Chicago, we used to be a mecca for successful minority-owned companies. And roughly 20 years ago, if you looked at the Crain's list of top 150 companies that are privately held in Chicagoland, there was 3 out of 150, roughly 2% of the top 150 companies were, you know, Black owned. Today, if you look at the top 150 companies in Chicagoland, 0 are Black owned. So we've gone substantially backwards. You know, they're all gone. All the Black banks are basically gone. All the Black insurance companies. You just go down the list. I'm using the Blacks as an example because it's been my life experience, but it's similar for the Latino community. It's similar for what's going on with women entrepreneurs. So to basically answer your question, as long as we continue to go backwards when it comes to this wealth gap, it's an enormous stumbling block in getting more of us on corporate boards. And so that's why I think it's so critical that we all live in this virtuous circle that I've mentioned several times today, where we're looking out for opportunities to help create wealth for minority entrepreneurs. You know, about who your investment banker is, who your lawyer is, you know, self-serving, say who your mutual, which do you ever use any minority mutual funds? You know, who's your advertising agent, who's your public relations firm, who's your technology consultant, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You know, all have to be looking for ways to help build wealth, and then we'll all be able to be on boards and support each other and help each other along the way. Because as we all rise up together, then we have more ability to bring all others along. That's the other thing. You know, once we become more successful, you get into on the governance committee, and then you know your friends and people you respect and believe in, you can bring them onto the board. And that's great. And it's so much fun when that happens. You know, when you know there's someone bright and brilliant that's been overlooked and misunderstood, you can get them on the board. And finally, I'd say one of the things we've done at Ariel Mutual Funds that is very rare, but over the years now, we can point to over 50 situations where we pushed a company to have their first diverse board member, over 50 times, from Sotheby's with Don Stewart to JLL with Sheila Penrose. 50 different examples like that where they didn't have any diversity on the board. We insisted that it happen. And that's how we can all look out for each other. As we get more successful, our larger shareholder in companies, then we have more influence to get the right response from those corporate management teams.
John and May, we have a question that you've actually almost answered. I believe that there needs to be a little bit more. And one of the questions gets into how do we get involved with boards? What I've heard you say loud and clear in so many different ways is sponsorship, sponsorship, sponsorship. People who sponsor others to be at the table make a difference. And then also the relationships of people knowing somebody else to know somebody else. So that circle of influence. Other kinds of initiatives that you would like to share with how to get involved on boards. You know, even think about your first board that you were supposedly a nobody, okay? And now you're a somebody, but you know, we have the hidden gems out there.
Yeah, well, you know, part obviously that I've been pounding home is we have to create opportunities for more of us to be successful. You know, the more of us that are in leadership roles in corporate America, the more of us that are successful entrepreneurs, then we become part of the pipeline that the recruiting firms want to recruit to the board. So I have to say that's number one, is to be successful. And we've been locked out because of historic discrimination in this country, the unfairness, the way the women and people of color have often been treated, going back to Jim Crow, going back to slavery. We know what that's been about. You know, it took forever for women to have the right to vote. You go through all the things that have been out there. So until we are full participants in our capitalist democracy, it's harder for us to get onto these boards. But the other thing, of course, the standard that everyone talks about, my first board came from, you know, my nonprofit service. I was an early board member of the Chicago Urban League. I got very involved in helping in other nonprofits, and I met people along the way serving in the nonprofit role. And so I know that that's a kind of a, you know, everyone says it, but it's true. And I met Pat Ryan, who founded Exelon Corporation, serving on a nonprofit board, and Pat was impressed with how I showed up and was
There you go.
good teammate. And he asked me as a person in my early 30s to join the Aon board, which was an extraordinary opportunity. And I've always been thankful to Pat for that. And I met Andy McKenna there, who was the head of the governance committee, and I got to know him better there. And Andy became the non-executive chairman of McDonald's and helped recruit me to that board. And Andy's been a great role model and mentor and friend for, you know well over 30 years. The other thing I always give them my Melody Hobson example, which is another slightly different one to make it more different. Her really great board service started because she worked for Bill Bradley's campaign for president. And many people are too young to remember Senator Bill Bradley, but he was, you know, extraordinary basketball player for Princeton and the New York Knicks, and then of course the three-time senator from New Jersey. And he ran against Al Gore and wasn't successful, but Melody poured everything into it. You know, she was working at Ariel full time, but like me, she loved Bill. And so she showed up at everything, supported everything, wrote checks she couldn't afford, brought her friends in. Next thing you know, she's flying on the campaign plane, and Bill is counting on her to organize and arrange fundraisers throughout the country. After the campaign and after we lost, he was having a conversation with Howard Schultz about who was the best teammate, you know, who was out there working the hardest for you, who was your most incredible volunteer. And Bill said, you know, hands down, it was Melody Hobson. And so not only did Howard Schultz recruit Melody to Starbucks board, where she's now the non-executive chairman of Starbucks, he also introduced her to Jeffrey Katzenberg, and she became the non-executive chairman of DreamWorks Animation.
Oh, yeah.
So she's one of these few African-American females, maybe the only one, to be chair of two publicly traded companies that all started because of her relationship with Bill Bradley, volunteering for that campaign. So I tell people, get engaged, be a good teammate in whatever you do, whether it's a nonprofit, or whether it's a political organization or civil rights organization. You never know who's watching and who can be looking out for you.
And particularly in nonprofit worlds, we're not getting paid to do this kind of board volunteerism. So, and it gets us around people that we typically aren't with on a daily basis, and how we show up and deliver on the promise over and over again makes a huge difference to being visible and seeing that people do want to take you on as a partner in other initiatives. Thank you, John.
Thanks, Barbara, for that question. Just kind of adding on to that particular question, John, have you ever said no to a board that was coming, you know, really knocking at your door, wanting you to be on the board? And if you did say no, why did you say no?
Well, you know, there's many reasons, of course. I mean, sometimes geography.
Okay.
You know, it's so much nicer to be where it's places like, I love being on boards that are easy to get to.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing is, are you interested, of course, in the products? You know, do you think you can get around and understand them and find them exciting and interesting? So if it's not a good fit product-wise, I'll say no. And I've been fortunate to have a lot of opportunities to say no. I've been very lucky that way. I realize that. The other reason, of course, the people on the board. One of the things that was attractive about Nike for me was, Phil Knight still there on the board, this extraordinary entrepreneur. Couldn't think of anything better. Tim Cook's the lead director. I learn a lot about things, and then so many of the other directors have done extraordinary things in their lives. So who's on the board? If you find the board members not interesting, you're not going to learn something from them. It's an easy route to say no. And then the final thing is, can you make a difference? And as you get older and older, you really want to be on a board where you can make an impact. And I've been on boards where I've left the board because I didn't think I was making an impact. I didn't think I was, making a contribution. That you didn't think the people really were listening or hearing you, or really cared what you thought. So you try to have, is this board going to be a place where when I get there, that the people are really going to be willing to engage on the issues that I think are important, where I have a chance to make a difference. If I can't make a difference, then again, it's another reason to say no. And then finally, these days, you also, of course, you have to be very careful because you can be accused of being overboarded. So, you got to realize there's a limit to how many boards you can be on.
Right. Thank you. Thank you. I think I'm getting down to my last question before we see if there's other questions in the chat box. But I'd like to know if, from your experience of working on boards, how does the board culture impact the value of being on the board, as well as your ability to be effective on the board? Now, the reason I ask this is because I have a number of years working on DE&I and organizations, and many of those years we did not focus in on the culture, which is all part of inclusion. We focused in on diversity, doing a better job of recruiting, ensuring that we have people recruiting that can identify with the population that we're trying to get in our organization. So we did a bang up job trying to get our hands around that. We were bringing people in, but we were not able to keep them, John. They would come in and they would leave just about as fast as we were bringing them in. But we just wouldn't bring ourselves to say that the water here in this fish bowl is dirty and needs to be changed. We wouldn't bring ourselves to that point. So I'm really interested in understanding about the cultures of boards. Some time back, I remember getting some information. I can't remember if it was the Conference Board, Catalyst, or where this came from. This was really directed at women, but it said that women are very effective on corporate boards when you can have 3. But if you just have 1, she's going to be ignored, not heard, dismissed, whatever. So you need 3, at least 3. But I haven't heard that much anymore. So, but the focus is on changing the culture of the board. So from your experience in working with boards, how has the board culture really changed to be more inclusive, or has it not changed to be more inclusive?
Yeah, so I would say some of that issue of 1 versus 3, I think is overstated. It's
Okay.
because I done earlier, it's the character of the people that are there. And it's interesting, and I'm trying to get around to this cultural issue, but one point I'd make, Melody Hobson, again, I've touched about her a lot today. She's this dynamic leader, and she was on a board with Sheryl Sandberg. And Sheryl Sandberg has said this publicly, that she watched Melody lean in on behalf of women and people of color in those board meetings. And that helped inspire her to write her bestseller, Lean In, watching Melody fight for women and people of color in the boardroom. So it's not the number, it's that spirit of what they have. Are they willing to be like John Lewis, and get in the way, make good trouble, fight for the right issues? That's at the heart of that. And also fits in with the culture of an organization as well as the board. So I just give 2 examples. I just recently read this year the book about the late John Thompson, the legendary coach at Georgetown. He was someone who was extraordinarily outspoken, fighting for African-American athletes, and got himself trouble. He got into big trouble. He made big trouble. Yeah. And ultimately, he was the first African-American to win a national championship. But interestingly, Phil Knight recruited him to the board of Nike early on. Can you think about that? He brought in not only a Black coach, which is unusual, but someone who was known for his outspoken spirit. And he was someone who was not going to just sit along, get along, and go along kind of a person. Mm-hmm. I think about McDonald's. Early on, Ray Kroc and Fred Turner, his number two person, he brought on African-American franchisees, suppliers, and board members who were outspoken. So one of his early franchisees was a guy named Cyril McSween, who was an extraordinary athlete, but he was also a civil rights leader and was one of the pallbearers in Dr. King's funeral, was the treasurer of SCLC during the height of the civil rights movement. To bring someone like Cirillo in as a franchisee made a statement. And if you look at many of the other successful folks that were on the management team at McDonald's, there were people who were comfortable speaking out and speaking up. And the people, I wouldn't go through all the names, but it ended up with someone like Don Thompson being the CEO of McDonald's, an African-American male who had grown up in public housing in Chicago, ascended to the top. And it was because they had created a culture that accepted senior African Americans, not only as suppliers, not only as franchisees, but as executives in the company. And meant because they were willing to put people in who were not shy, who were going to say what they thought. They could be themselves. That's really important. And they knew that the white executives that were there respected them for their uniqueness. They weren't just there to be the token in the boardroom or the token in the executive suite, but they were there and finally, many of those executives ultimately became major suppliers, when they left McDonald's. So it's that culture does matter. You're hitting at the right thing, but it comes from the leadership, creating that atmosphere where people who are strong-willed are feeling comfortable in that organization, and they make a difference, and they go out and they bring others into the organization like themselves, and they have respect of the broader community. The civil rights community, the political leaders, and others know that this organization is one that cares because of the character of the people they brought into that organization.
Thank you, John. That was powerful. All of you leaders out there, that was the message. Leaders create culture. Your job is to create that kind of culture that you want, that's going to be inclusive and drive your business forward in these changing dynamic days. Is there any other information that we did not cover, John, on this topic that you would like to cover, or some final remarks that you would like to make before I see if there's any other questions?
One thing, I've really enjoyed this dialogue this morning, and I won't get into a long conversation about this, but one other thing that we've done at Ariel that's really important is that about 18 years ago, along with my friend Charles Tribbett, who was at Russell Reynolds, we created the Black Corporate Directors Conference. And over the years, it's become Black and Brown directors come to our conference every year. And it's gone from 30 directors to now 200 directors come together once a year to learn from each other how to be leaders in the boardroom, how to lead around these difficult issues, how to make a difference, in the boardroom. And every year we have a conscience of the conference. We've had John Lewis, we've had Harry Belafonte, we've had Congressman Clyburn, we've had Barack Obama. We've had these great people there, Reverend Jackson, Reverend Sharpton, Mark Morial, to remind people of the responsibilities that we all have. And we're really proud of the fact that we've also, of course, brought in Ursula Burns and Don Thompson and Ken Chenault and senior African-American leaders, and then have them have that chance to interact with white CEOs from Jeff Immelt to Jamie Dimon. And to be able to have the kind of conversation we had today, it's been wonderful at our conference every year. And we're also proud of the fact that the Latino community has created a conference patterned after ours. The Asian community has created a conference patterned after ours. And we support each other's conferences, speak at each other's conferences, and feel like we can make a difference by coming together every year to remind each other of the differences we can make once we're in the boardroom, and hopefully make a dent in this wealth gap and opportunity gap in this country that gets worse and worse.
One of the things that I read just recently, and hopefully I won't get the figure wrong, but if we would close the wealth gap in this country, it would increase our GDP for, what was it, John? I don't know if you remember, it's 40-something trillion dollars.
I mean, not
Did I
quite
get
that much.
that number wrong?
I think it's maybe 5 trillion.
5 trillion. Okay, all right, 5
Don't hold me
trillion.
to that.
But I will find the document. I'll send it to Phil and Barbara, and you can send it to the participants that joined us today if you would like. John, it has been delightful, just been delightful. Do we have any questions there?
Yes, yes,
okay.
mate.
Okay.
From VP Parker, for a board that is not diverse, what is the approach to persuade board members to roll off so we can bring more diversity to the table? Nobody's going to volunteer to resign. So they want suggestions on how to, over time, create diversity when the current board members are of the dominant group and there's no open spaces on the board.
I just think that's one of those excuses that, non-progressive boards have for not having women and people of color on the board and diverse board members. They can always change the bylaws and add one more director. It's easy to do. You can go from 12 to 13 or 11 to 12 or 10 to 11, whatever it happens to be. There's no problem. There's just no excuse for it. So I think the only way they can change is for shareholders to push them and challenge them and withhold proxy votes. You get civil rights leaders to hold them accountable, political leaders to hold them accountable. Get the word out. These are bad actors, and they don't feel the pressure to change. Chris Welch, our Speaker of the House here in Illinois, created a legislation where now all the companies in Chicagoland and throughout the state of Illinois have to be transparent about the diversity of their boards. And just the transparency has made change. All of a sudden, Mondelez and Walgreens had their, added their first diverse board member. And Kraft Heinz, the same thing. Again, they had women, but they didn't have African-American women. So Valerie Jarrett joined the Walgreens board, for example, which led to Roz Brewer ultimately becoming CEO of Walgreens. So that transparency that Chris Welch created made a difference.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Other questions, Linda?
That is all we have at this point.
Okay.
Hey, May, this is Phil. Let me just make a quick comment. First of all, John, thank you so much for your time this morning. This conversation was extremely insightful. You hit a very key point earlier, and we see it all the time in our business, in the human capital consulting business. Talent acquisition, retention, employee engagement, certainly cultural alignment, and obviously business performance are all key benefits to having a more diverse environment, right? When you have more diversity, then you have more opportunity for folks to contribute. And we're seeing business performance from organizations improve as a result, certainly as a result of that. So you hit the nail on the head as it relates to certainly that conversation. From your perspective, John, as you think about board members, and you mentioned courage, essentially courage, right? Having the courage to speak up. That's really what it's about. For board members, whether it's nonprofit or corporate board members who are the minority, meaning whether they're African-American, women, Latino, et cetera, that are on boards. From a practical perspective, recognizing that change typically happens when you, especially within organizations and companies, when you're talking about improving company or business performance. What sort of logical steps, if you will, strategies, should a board member take a look at in terms of approaching that organization about how they can become more diverse as an organization and also improve their culture? Let me give you an example. NACD, National Association of Corporate Directors, came out a couple of years ago with this blue ribbon study where they took a look at the culture. They said, look, board members have a paramount responsibility to help impact the culture of organizations. And this is the benefit of doing that. And they came out with specific strategies about how to approach that. So what are some of the strategies as you think about a individual board member who might be a minority on a board, to approach that board and others in that organization about how they can now take a look at changing, whether it's the culture or whether it's having a more diverse and inclusive environment?
Oh, that's, there's a couple of things there. I mean, one of the things that we talk a lot about at our conference is that we are not often part of the social network of the boards if we get on. And a lot of the decisions, a lot of the trust that gets built, of course, not to be stereotypical, but people are at the golf course and the country club and the private clubs and all the things that are a part of our society, where people vacation, where, if you're off in, Aspen for a couple of weeks and, your fellow board members are there, you get together for dinner and you help shape the culture of the organization with those offline conversations of what you see that are important. And often we're not in those rooms. So one of the things, if you really are trying to make an impact, trying to find a way to engage with your fellow directors outside of the boardroom, building that level of trust where you can have those uncomfortable conversations, forcing yourself to maybe go to places you normally wouldn't be and say, hey, or say, let's have lunch, let's have dinner, let's get a conference call going, finding ways to stay in touch and build that trusted relationships with your management teams and your fellow directors. And it's something that's not easy to do. I have to say, that's one of the things I still struggle with and I'd like to be better at, but I've watched some directors are so good at that. The Vernon Jordans of the world were masters at that. And so they could change culture, and he helped, create the Ken Chenault at American Express and Ursula Burns at Xerox. He created that atmosphere, but he was so good and adept at building relationships between meetings that he was able to engage and change that culture. So I think that's really, really important. And then the only other thing I would say is that, getting on the right committee is what I was thinking about, where you're truly an expert. So I try to get on the governance committee because I think I've built some expertise in governance, and I can then have impact on who's going to be on the board and have some of these conversations. Sometimes there are other committees that impact, chairing a finance committee or something. You can make sure that not only are you helping them with their financial decisions, but making sure the minority professional financial services firms have opportunities to do business. So being on the right committee where you have a leadership role and you can impact culture, because if you're on the right committee, you'll have a better chance to become chairman of the committee. And once you become chairman of the committee, you can have an enormous impact on the culture of an institution.
Absolutely. Good.
Thank you. That was powerful. Any other questions from Phil or Barbara or the group? Did you see?
No more questions, May. I do have a challenge for everyone, though.
Okay. All right.
I'm going to actually put it in the chat. Is that, we've been getting quite a few great comments just through the chat about how useful and helpful and eye-opening this conversation has been. I want to challenge everyone to think about what they're going to do differently in the next 24 hours to move this forward in a way that needs to have every person's voice and to help the conversation rise and elevate to the level it needs to elevate to. So ask yourself, what are you going to do the next 24 hours? And what kind of support do you need to make that happen? So thank you so much, Phil. We've had a great conversation. John, May, superb. And I'm thrilled that we recorded this because others are going to hear it that need to hear this. They didn't know that they needed to hear it, but they're going to need to hear it.
Okay.
Well, thank you so
Barbara.
much. It's been a great interview. Appreciate it.
Thank you, John.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
May, as you finish up and as you think about, we did a great job of summarizing. You and your experience is also amazingly broad, okay? And so what's the 1 to 3 things that you want to make sure that everybody knows that can be really easy things to do going forward here?
Well, I think that John spelled it out really clearly. Is number one, your awareness about yourself. This is the thing that's so important, just self-awareness. Where are you? When you think about where you were brought up, your communities, where, you know, where you live now, the groups that you support, the community organizations you support, your churches, whatever it is. Or is it a diverse community, and are you engaged with the members of the folks that are different than you are? It's really important for me, being a Black woman from Las Cruces, New Mexico. I grew up in an area where everyone, all of my neighbors were Latinx. They were Mexican Americans. So that's all I knew. I just knew all of my people that I knew. I played with them. All I wanted to do was to play. And I had my wonderful time with my friends and sharing foods. I was in their home, they were in my home. So you have to put yourself in that spot, because all of us don't have that opportunity. We haven't done that. We haven't been there. That's not where our families brought us up. And so we come up and we have these certain groups of friends, and they're usually people like us. Our egos kind of like to be around other people just like us. So if we want to grow and we want this whole nation to survive and to survive globally, I think we just have to know ourselves and broaden ourselves. So it's really an education with ourselves that we need to focus in on. Everybody can do this. Everybody can broaden out their relationships. Everybody can take somebody different to lunch. Everybody can invite somebody to coffee, even if it's on Zoom that is different from them, to have a chat. So those are the kinds of things that I think is really important, and to not be afraid. And you know, we're going to make mistakes. I make mistakes all the time. And look, I've been in this whole diversity arena for many, many years, and I'll have to apologize for my mistake, take it in so that I don't do it again. But you know, that's the way we grow. You know, when we first learned to walk, we didn't just stand up and start walking. We fell down a whole lot of times. I remember falling down a lot when I first learned to ride a two-wheel bicycle. So I just want to let you know that, you know, we get to be an adult and we feel like we can't fall down. We can't make a mistake. We can't skin our knees. We can't do, you know, this is going to be horrible for us. What's the neighbors going to think, or whatever, that we fell down. You know what? Let's take that off, because we'll never grow, we'll never change our environment if we continue to be there, you know, within ourselves, not growing and not exploring this wonderful world that we have been given. So that is the number one thing that anybody can do. Anybody can do that. So as in my teaching, I kind of talk about 4 E's for people, because I think that once you can educate yourself and you can, you know, learn as much as you can. YouTube is a great way to learn things. Talking to your friends, talking to people within your communities and your organization, great ways to learn. But then you got to be engaging. You got to go someplace. You got to go out to these places that John was saying that maybe you're uncomfortable in, but you got to build some relationships. You got to engage with people. And so that's really important. Then you have to embrace their differences. So you have to listen more than you talk. You got to embrace their differences, and then you have to have empathy. You got to walk in somebody else's shoes. And that is a whole lot of the embracing comes with the empathy. So those are the kinds of things that I think are things to do, Barbara. If people have additional questions about that, please ask.
Thank you. And I'm just encouraging everyone who wants to stay on to talk with us a little bit more for 10 or 15 minutes and have specific questions for you, May, that we can do that. We do have some different resources that we're going to send to you later as well, so you can take a look at all these different resources to keep learning and growing. And then as we look ahead, we would like to do a quick evaluation. Linda, you're going to help us with that? Get some pulse check on here. Linda, you're moving that forward. You are viewing Linda's. There we go. So, got a few questions here. We've got 4 questions for you. So if you'll go ahead and respond to the questions, we would really appreciate your insight from today's program. And feel free to share other comments in the chat room as well. Everybody got their poll up front? And then as you're taking that, we're going to actually have on December 2nd another executive leadership forum, and it's focused on board dynamics, board of directors, and the CEO, so that the partnership is great. So I believe that this conversation will continue in December with that importance of the C-suite level, with the having a dynamic relationship with the board of directors. So that's coming up on December 2nd. And September 21st, we are all hearing right now about the great resignations that are occurring in our era. And this has been paramount to employers to really, how do we simplify the attraction and retention of employees? And our own team member, Albert Almanza, will be our facilitator and content designer and leader of that program. And then on October 19th, what is your leadership worth? You're going to hear from 4 different executive coaches who are versed in the stakeholder-centered coaching approach, which really gets into behavior change. So again, talking about how do we integrate all of this coming up. And in fact, one of those coaches is on our call today, Aaron Wheeler. So thank you so much. As we go forward, we'd like to invite you back, and please invite others. Share our websites and our webinars and workshops with other folks.
You know, one last thing, Barbara, just thank you so much, May, for facilitating and being the thread that allowed us to get access to John Rogers, and you did a great job just in terms of that interviewing process. And so we thank you so much for being a part of the forum this morning. One of the things that came through loud and clear, and you talk about this all the time, May, is that, you know, diversity and inclusion has to be a part of the business strategy for an organization, for it to be successful and measurable and sustainable. And just as much of a strategy as, you know, sales or marketing and operational strategies that the organization has. So those things came through loud and clear, along with the fact that it has to be embedded in the culture, or it just becomes training workshops that folks go through, and those binders get put on the shelf after a period of time. So I think, May, through your work, you certainly drive that home consistently. We heard that from John today, certainly in a uniform fashion. And so just a great job, and thank you for helping us put this together.
You're quite welcome. I enjoy working with you and Phil and Barbara.
Okay, good, good.
It's called the Mutual Admiration Society, May. Thank you.
And thanks to our listening audience for staying with us until the end. So, and hope they enjoyed it, and it looks like they did from the feedback we've gotten.
And so those of you who would like to stay on for a few more minutes and talk with May,